Chapter 4. A Feast to Remember. For the rest of his life, Polynikos would remember the next few days like a bout of fever. Continuous celebrations, holy processions, feasts in the Prytaneon, visits from distinguished guests, all brought him to such a state of daze and exhaustion that he only dreamed of one thing: to run away and hide. When he at last came to his senses, that is, to the house of the Carians, he shut himself up in their room and begged Melocles not to let anyone in. So Melocles explained to all visitors, and there was no shortage of them, that the great athlete was sick and took no calls. Then at nightfall, when the endless procession of devotees who had pressed to see as little as his sandal finally went away, his friends assembled at his table, and he told them everything, time and again. Only Melocles, the old steersman Coroibos, and Diossos belonged to that charmed circle. And now a pair of oxen could not drag Diossos out of that room. Apart from the three of them, one more person listened to these stories: Euclea, who remained all evening behind the linen curtain separating the two rooms. In its shadow and in complete silence, she greedily drank every word from the champion's lips. Whole evenings passed that way. Polynikos felt good in this room. He did not want to hear about any celebrations, meetings, or feasts, for, although the official days of the games were over, celebrations in honor of the competitors went on. In the next few days, just such a thing was expected: a sumptuous reception arranged by the leading citizens of Corinth. A great local notable, Agamemnes, a member of the Creonid family, a merchant famed throughout Greece and heir to great estates, vineyards, and gardens, was to host this year's event. It was an honor to participate in such a feast, and only the most distinguished local citizens and the most respected guests had been invited. Agamemnes came from a great family and was related to the mightiest lords of Corinth. And not only of Corinth. He once held the high office of ephor, and thus he exercised a lot of influence over the government and its international relations. But Polynikos was fed up with all these celebrations, and though he was invited as one of the champions, he absolutely refused to attend. In vain did Melocles try to persuade him. In vain did old Coroibos plead with him to overcome his dislike of crowds. Polynikos resisted. "I am not suitable for such a life," he said. "I am not suitable for the company of such people at all. Great lords, I don't know what to say, what to do, or how to behave. Leave me alone, friends." Finally, Callias, who showed up the next day, convinced him. Only after a great effort did he manage to get himself invited, and his eyes bulged with astonishment to hear that there was someone who, though he was invited, did not want to participate in such a symposium. They invited him, and he didn't want to go? What kind of nonsense was that? He was indignant. "By all the immortal gods," he boomed. "Do you understand, Polynikos, what a feast that is? What a house that is? You will remember this feast for as long as you live, and you will tell your grandchildren about it one day. You say you are tired of all these celebrations, and yes, I get it. But by Bacchus, the Agamemnes feast is not a party for judges and priests. And what kind of music will be there? What lute players? What dancers? What poetry? And what wine? Oh, what wine! By Bacchus, I tell you, you'll be mocked if you do not go. And I'll be the first to mock you. Then they will learn in Miletus that you did not attend, and they will think that maybe you weren't invited, or that you don't know how to behave in society, or something like that. and so you will bring shame on your own city." This last argument seemed to convince Polynikos. Or maybe the ordinary curiosity of the young prevailed. In any case, he was finally persuaded. Still, on his way to the feast, in his festive dress, he repeated to Melicles, "I'm telling you, I am not fit for these things. I'm completely unfit. You'll see." The house, or rather the palace of Agamemnes, would have dazzled the richest lords of those rough times. Its oblong paved courtyard, surrounded by a colonnaded cloister, was full of people. Between two rows of small fountains, distinguished guests in white but colourfully trimmed robes mingled. At the edges, beneath the columns and swathed in garlands of laurels and flowers, stood a line of slaves. At the entrance from the courtyard to the Megaron stood the host himself, Agamemnes, greeting the arriving guests. Next to him, two half-naked female slaves held baskets with wreaths of flowers. Agamemnes placed one on each new guest's head. And while he did that, another slave called out the name and family of the visitor as he entered the Megaron. Other servants showed him to his seat. Polynikos, stunned by all this, was glad when he finally, somehow, found himself at his seat, and all the more glad when he saw that he had been assigned a place between Cleomenes and Chilon. Chilon was the famed and now retired coach of the Athenian team. Polynikos knew both of them well from the gymnasium, and both had been kind to him. With the rare impartiality of a truly great athlete, Cleomenes did not nurture resentment for his defeat. On the contrary, he seemed interested in Polynikos. He asked him questions, gave him advice and explanations, and declared only one desire: to face him again in Athens or some other Pan-Hellenic games. Chilon, a famous runner decades ago, had been delighted with Polynikos' form even before the decisive day, and had pointed him out to his team as a model of the perfect form. Now, seeing the young man's embarrassment, he took him in hand, explaining in turn who the various people around them were. The room, which could accommodate about 200 people, was already full. Guests sat in threes or fours at small three-legged tables. The most worthy had been seated in great, exquisitely carved chairs called thrones. Everyone else was on benches decorated with bronze. Before them, flowers were arranged on pink marble tables. The columns surrounding the hall were draped with garlands of flowers. Polynikos' eyes sparkled as he admired all these splendours, the whiteness of the garments of the distinguished guests, the red of the flowers. Chilon, leaning towards him, pointed out, with his gaze on those sitting close to him, the dignified throne guests. "That there, in the place of honour, trembling with age, grey-haired, sick and shrunken, is the Archon Basileus. That is, the most important official in Corinth. A bit like a king and a bit like a high priest. But, in fact, he is a mindless doll, a demented fool who can't even eat by himself. Others rule for him. Myron, Lysias, he is the Archon Polemarch. And this here, Agamemnes, the host who gave you your wreath at the entrance. And there, the tall one with the magnificent snow beard, dignified and noble. Who is he?" "That is Demetrion, once chief strategos of Corinth and commander of the fleet. Not too long, though, because he was then kicked out for egregious embezzlement. He made a nice packet, though, and kept it. A model of Corinthian citizenship." Then Polynikos noticed a reveller seated closest to them. He was an impressive man, not very tall, very obese, with powerful shoulders, and an even more powerful belly. In his big face, sweaty and red, bulged gigantic eyes, bloodshot, almost out of their sockets like monstrous plums. His head was completely bald and rested stiffly on the folds of a fat neck. He had a short beard, sparse as a goat's, and thick, moist lips. All of this formed a strange mask, monstrous and funny at the same time. "Who is that fellow there, with a fat, satyr's face?" he asked Kylon. "Shh! Not so loud. That is Koreos, Agamemnes' brother. Actually, I'm not sure if they are birth brothers or only first cousins. I think he is the richest of them all, and also the greatest thief. A villain and a cruel man. He does not hold any office because, if he did, he would have to pretend to be honest, and he doesn't want to bother." "What does he do?" "Why, he trades in slaves, of course. He is the biggest slave trader in Corinth, and probably in all of Greece. Besides that, he does everything any honest man would shudder to think of." Polynikos laughed. "Nice company here." Great people, young man." Cleomenes leaned towards them. "Don't listen to Kylon too much, Polynikos. He is deliberately exaggerating. As a Democrat, he hates rich people and wants to see something revolting in each of them." Kylon huffed. "I am not saying this as a Democrat, but as an old man who has seen a lot of life. Oh, you youth! I have learned a lot in my lifetime, and most of it has not been very inspiring." "And Solon? What do you think about him?" "Ah, Solon? Well, he is a great man. A holy man sent to us by the gods. But since he left Athens, things have not gone well for us." "Don't complain, Kylon. Ever since you were passed by for a judgeship, you have been bitter, and nothing seems worthy of your approval." Upon saying this, Cleomenes laughed. Kylon seemed irritated and fell silent. Polynikos continued to look around the room. His attention turned to 4 men seated at a table to the right of them. They talked in low voices. In their movements, soft and composed, in their respectful manner of addressing the servants and their neighbours, in their every gesture, there was something gentle and delicate and radically different from the brutal self-confidence of other revellers. The softness in their manners attracted the attention of those around them. "And those 4, who are they?" Polynikos asked in a whisper. Kylon looked at him in surprise. "By Hermes, I should rather ask you. These are Ionians, your relatives from Asia Minor. The oldest one, that one there, is Gorgias, the brother of Thales the Milesian, and like his brother, a sage, a philosopher and an astronomer. His eyesight is poor from all that staring at the stars all night. He's an odd fish, but a great man and a worthy heir to his brother's wisdom. And about his brother, Thales, Solon himself said he had never met a wiser man. And that was Solon speaking, mind you. And the one now talking to him is Hipponax of Ephesus. He's a poet, a singer and a great wag. Young, but famous already, because he has tormented many important people with his epigrams. I know him. He brought a whole scroll of his poems today, they say. And of his friend, the poetess Sappho. Women composing poems. What a capital idea. He will read these poems tonight. If he does, listen up, because he's worth listening to. I don't know the other 2, but they must also be special, because they have the eyes of people who have seen the gods. Deep, wise eyes. You will not find such among the local Corinthian merchants." Polynikos nodded, but after a while he said, maybe, but they look at everyone with such kindness and indulgence, such condescension, as if they were speaking to barbarians or children. Because they are. What can such Gorgias talk about with any Spartan who can't even read? Or with some Corinthian merchant of cattle? By all the gods, they are right. We would all need a lot of work to catch up with them. Meanwhile, there was a commotion. Servants started bringing in the food. The feast began. And now the warm smell of meat, melted fat and hot spices mingled with the scent of flowers and expensive Syrian perfumes. The air grew heavy and stuffy. Faces reddened. Polynikos watched curiously as droplets of sweat began to form on the greasy, bald head of Koreos. The dignified banker ate greedily, smacking his fat lips. 2 young slaves, still children and as beautiful as fairies, ministered to him, skillfully serving him his food the way he liked it. Koreos was quite a gourmand, and brought his own slaves to every feast, slaves who knew his tastes and worked to assure him the greatest possible pleasure. Polynikos noticed the striking beauty of these children. One of them, with a dark complexion and dark wavy hair, seemed as if strewn with gold. He reminded him of Diossos. Only in his black, big eyes, apart from sadness, something else lurked. Fear. It was the alert fear of a dog, watching for the slightest twitch of anger on his master's face. It was an unpleasant sight, and Polynikos turned away from it with distaste. The first part of the feast was almost over. It was getting dark. The servants brought in the last, 6th dish of the night, and other servants began to light lamps hanging on chains above the revellers. The eagerly awaited second part of the feast was about to begin, the symposium, beloved and adored by all Greeks. Long hours of sweet wine, sweet cakes, sweet songs, stories, and dance. Symposium! 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 Called out various voices. Faces lit up. There was a commotion, the sonorous gurgling of wine mixed in craters, and poured out into serving cups delighted the hearts of the guests. The strings of a lyre and kitharas rang out, tuned by the impatient hands of musicians. Hipponax reached for the scroll at his side and began to look through it. He was to read his new poem at the opening of the symposium. Meanwhile, a gorgeously shaped, matte gold Lydian crater, richly decorated with chasing, was brought in and set in the centre of the room. This contained no wine, only small shards of pottery on which the names of guests were written. One of them would be drawn to determine who was to become the king of the feast, the symposiarch. By custom, only after that solemn moment, and after a proper offering to the gods, could guests start to drink the divine drink of Dionysos. But some guests already snuck a cup or two, because the heat of the hall was great, and the wine, brought straight from the cellars, was deliciously cool. The servants rushed about removing the remnants of the food and setting up wine jars and drinking goblets. In confusion, one of the beautiful Syrian boys ministering to Koreos stumbled and poured out the contents of the vase he was holding on his master's mantle. And then a terrible thing happened. The poor little slave turned pale and backed away half a step, trembling, muttering some incomprehensible words. Polynikos did not hear those words, but instead he saw Koreos' face suddenly turn purple with rage. A muffled roar escaped his massive throat, while his hand grabbed a heavy alabaster goblet and struck the boy on the head. There was a short cry, a thud of the boy's head hitting the floor, and silence. Guests jumped up from their seats. The violence shocked everyone, but no one dared say a word. Koreos calmed down a bit.
"Forgive me, my friends," he said. "Forgive me. His awkwardness made me angry." He turned to his retinue. "Take this thing away."
He kicked the body slumped before him.
"And bring me a new cloak."
And he sat down heavily in his armchair. The guests followed his example. They slowly returned to their places. Conversations began again. Only Hipponax put away his scroll.
"I don't read my poetry in slaughterhouses,"
he said contemptuously. Polynikos sat numb. He was deathly pale. Red blotches appeared on his face. His hands trembled. He watched, spellbound, as Koreos brushed his soiled cloak with the back of his hand, and the servants dragged the little Syrian away, his lovely head hanging down limply, and others wiped the fresh blood from the marble floor. And then, suddenly, Polynikos felt something inside him surge, some kind of irresistible wave rising from his depths, a wave of blind, inexorable hatred choking his throat, squeezing his larynx, turning the whole world red before his eyes. Then he saw the whole world drop away and grow silent. Only one thing was now in front of his eyes. He got up and walked calmly, slowly, to the table at which Koreos sat, took hold of that same alabaster goblet, and, with all his might, smashed it straight into the huge, sweaty mouth. Someone screamed. Someone laughed, a short, spasmodic laugh. Polynikos stood motionless for a moment, squinting his pale blue eyes. Then he returned to his seat, not stopped by anyone. Chilon and Cleomenes jumped up from their chairs, grabbing his shoulders. "What have you done, you madman?" they whispered in terror. And Hipponax regarded him seriously for a moment, then suddenly clapped his hands. "Our quick runner got quickly drunk," he shouted. "Drunk on his first cup." And leaning over to Polynikos, he whispered, "Go, quick, go. Take him away, Athenians." "He got drunk," repeated the others after Hipponax.
"He is drunk,"
announced Callias, who suddenly appeared at their side as if sprung from underground. Chilon and Cleomenes, taking Polynikos by the shoulders, led him away. Polynikos walked, stunned, not knowing where he was going and why. Callias pushed him from behind.
"Hurry up, you madman! Hurry up! Get out of here while you still can!"
With Polynikos' sudden departure, all attention turned to Koreos. The merchant looked terrible. Blood gushed from his mouth and ran down his beard. He spat broken teeth. His face was purple with shock and pain, his veins engorged. His eyes, always protruding, now seemed to pop out of his head. At first he called for his entourage, but now he was unable to give orders.
"I can't breathe," he snorted.
A crowd of friends and servants surrounded him. Some were tearing open the robes on his chest, and others sprinkled water in his face. All shouted frantically. Callias mingled with this crowd, surreptitiously making sure that Polynikos had left the room. Polynikos walked through the courtyard, hauled by the two Athenians. Servants and slaves parted before them, assuming that one of the revellers had fainted and was returning home. And Polynikos did seem sick. He was pale as a corpse. His lips had turned grey and numb, and he was unable to speak. His whole body trembled. They went out into the street. "What have you done, madman?" Cleomenes whispered.
"I did it all wrong,"
stammered out Polynikos.
"I did not bust open that ugly head."
"If you had, you wouldn't have left that Megaron alive, and I wouldn't give a broken obol for your skin." Chilon said, "Cleomenes, go back to the feast. You don't need to be seen with him." "And you?"
"Me? I am an old man. I am safe. They won't dare raise a hand against me."
But at that moment, a fourth man caught up with them. It was Callias, out of breath, gasping like forge bellows.
"Go back, Athenians," he said. "Go back. I'll bring this. I'll take him away."
Possibly for the first time in his life, Callias was lost for words.
"Are you a friend of his?"
"Oh, gods, unfortunately, yes. The vengeful gods decided to punish me with his friendship, but yes, I am."
"Then explain to him that he must not stay in Corinth a moment longer. Do you understand?"
"Do I understand? By Hermes! He will be at sea in an hour, or I am not Callias."
"Better in half an hour."
"Yes, better, Athenians."
They broke up. Suddenly, Polynikos, pulled by Callias, stopped.
"Why am I supposed to run away? What did I do? Tell me."
Callias raised both hands to the heavens.
"Oh, gods," he groaned. "He's asking why. He broke an alabaster goblet in the face of the most worthy citizen of Corinth. He insulted a member of the council and the brother of the governor of the city, and now he asks why he must leave. Have you noticed, fool, that no one dared say a word when this scoundrel killed his slave? Nobody. Understand? Nobody. He killed a child in a symposium. He offended the gods. He offended the host and the guests. And no one said a thing."
"It wasn't about insulting, Callias. It was... Have you seen that boy, Callias?"
"And what do you care about someone else's slave? Fool! Fool! 3 times fool!"
"Don't insult me, Callias, I ask you.
Not now. I am not at my best at the moment." Polynikos was irritated.
All right, smart chiton. But you should know that you got out of there alive only thanks to me."
"How's that?"
"Oh, yes, simple soul. As we left the Megaron, Agamenes was giving orders to detain you."
"But I grabbed his arm. 'Don't do this, Agamenes,' I said."
"And Agamenes obeyed you?"
"Yes, because I told him you were the son of a prince and the nephew of Polycrates of Samos. You know, the nephew of Polycrates. Ha!"
"I?"
"Yes, you."
Polynikos was so astonished that he allowed himself to be pulled along.
"But that's not true," he whispered.
"Of course it isn't." But Agamenes froze when he heard it, uncertain what to do, and that's all the time we needed to get out. He can imprison a hero of the games, but arrest a relative of the richest prince in Hellas? Agamenes would not dare do that, would he?
"Good, but none of this is true."
"Of course it's not true, spring onion. But before they realise it, before they realise that I gave them a load of hogwash, half an hour will pass, an hour maybe, and it's all we need. Maybe they don't know exactly where you are staying, and maybe they won't find it quickly." He froze. "By all gods, I believe I hear pursuit."
They listened for a while, but heard nothing. Callias breathed out hard.
"Yes, I sacrifice myself for you. I lie like your natural father, and you won't even let me call you a fool. Oh, justice."
"Forgive me, Callias, but what will happen now when that turns out to be untrue?"
Callias shrugged. "What can happen? I will say that I was mistaken, and that's it. Who might not lose his head in such confusion? Anyway, Polycrates really has a nephew with a similar name. Yes, Polydoros. Exactly. Polydoros, Polycrates, Polynikos. Who can keep all these Samian names straight? Don't you worry now. They won't touch a hair on my head. But it would be better if I were not seen in your company. So, for Hermes' sake, can you move your feet? Which one of us is the champion runner? But why should I run away like a thief at night? Insisted Polynikos. Oh, gods! If you were my son... No, that would be too scary. Get this. One brother of Chaereos is the governor of Corinth. Another is the captain of the guards. And he himself has 200 slaves, plus mercenaries and servants. Plus, they are Creonids, and Creonids never forgive the slightest offence, let alone knocked out teeth. Do not say one word more, Polynikos. Please, don't tease me. When he found out what had happened, Melocles immediately realized that there was no time to lose. He took command of his comrades and woke Diossos, sending him out to stand sentry at the street corner. He ordered the steersman to rush to the boat and prepare it for departure, while he and Polynikos began packing their belongings. Polynikos was trembling. "Melocles," he complained, "why do we have to run? Think about it. All those triumphs yesterday, and now we run like thieves." Melocles said nothing. He was stuffing their things in a large bag. "Melocles, are you also angry with me like Callias? Melocles!" Melocles grabbed him by the arm. "No, I am not angry with you at all. You did beautifully, and I would probably have done the same thing. Just do not ask me now why we should run. Not now. Now we run, then we talk, yes?" "Hurry up!" Callias urged them from the entrance, looking out into the street again and again. Diossos' mother emerged from the adjoining room, and with her the frightened and trembling Euclea. Melocles settled the bill and said, "Keep these jugs and cups as souvenirs, and remember us well," he said, as he went out. Euclea raised her terrified eyes to Polynikos. "Are you leaving, my lord?" she asked. Polynikos stared at her, still flushed and warm from sleep, with her hair in disarray, tears in her eyes, her lips quivering pitifully. She seemed to him so lovely, so very lovely, so dear that he felt a sudden tightness in his throat, and could not speak a word. "I'm leaving," he whispered in a choked voice. "And you won't be back?" Polynikos grabbed her hand. "I will be back, by Zeus, I will be back. I will be back for you, girl." "Polynikos! Polynikos!" Melocles called from outside. Polynikos ran out of the room. Half an hour later, the Milesian boat left the harbour. Euclea stood on the shore, staring out into the darkness. The shadow of Diossos approached her. "Oh, Euclea, will they come back? Tell me, they will come back, yes?" "I don't know, Diossos. I don't know."